My name is Milton Chamberlain, and I want to share with you something I've learned over the last 25 years that relates to the question of the age of the earth and does that really matter? I think the scriptural answer to this question is no, it does not matter unless someone else thinks it matters. Although this is about an opinion and thought rather than action, the question of the age of the earth seems to me to be similar to what Paul taught in the New Testament about meat offered to idols and whether or not a Christian should eat or not eat that meat. Paul's instruction was that you are to eat whatever you buy in the marketplace without asking questions. You are to eat whatever your host puts before you when you are a guest in someone's home, unless they make a point that this is meat offered to an idol, and then you don't eat. How does that relate to the age of the earth? I think it's simply this. It does not matter if someone thinks the earth is old or young. It's not an issue. It has nothing to do with your relationship with Christ. It's merely a matter of how you understand Genesis chapter 1 and 2 in relationship to science. It has nothing to do with your relationship to Christ or with following him. However, increasingly in our world, there is polarization of opinions on this matter. Obviously, the atheists and agnostics and skeptics declare that the earth is old, and anyone that thinks it's young is undereducated. On the other hand, there are many Christians that think, since the Bible appears to describe creation of the universe, and certainly of the earth, in a matter of 6 days, then whatever science says must be wrong. And therefore, they declare they are anti-science and think that Genesis 1 is correct and science is wrong. Now, holding these opinions is one thing. Trying to force these opinions on someone else, or saying that a Christian that doesn't have the same opinion is somehow less spiritual than I am, yeah, that matters. That is very, very wrong. So why deal with this topic now? As I mentioned, after 25 years of teaching internationals conversational English and the Bible, I heard comments such as this: science can explain everything without God, or Earth and universe are demonstrably billions of years old, not 10,000 years, as some people say. As I mentioned, there is this increasing polarization and anti-Bible view among skeptics and an anti-science view among some Christians. For example, I have actually heard this. Christians who say Earth is old are culturally compromised. They are somehow less spiritual. To think Earth is old is to deny plain scripture. And then, of course, the atheist view is the Bible is irrelevant to science and to life. And science and faith are enemies forever. That's polarization. Both of these positions, anti-Bible, anti-science, share one thing: they're dogmatic. They're saying my opinion is the only opinion. And that attitude is a barrier to finding truth. Science is the only reality attitude never finds God because it's not looking. While to deny obvious scientific evidence is to reject truth. But there's two more reasons, and these come straight from Scripture. We are to love God with all our minds. This is part of the Great Commandment. But typically, what is emphasized in sermons or teaching about the Great Commandment is all your heart, all your soul, and love your neighbor as yourself. There's not much emphasis on one's mind. And that's where these opinions are formed and shaped. That's what we have to do, is try and find the truth with all our minds. And Christians are to be known as reasonable people. In Philippians 4, verses 4 and 5, Paul says, rejoice in the Lord always. Again, I will say, rejoice. Let your reasonableness be known to everyone. In other words, we don't reject some evidence just because we don't like it or it doesn't match our attitudes. We are reasonable. We follow all the evidence to wherever it leads, because all truth is God's truth. And we never have any reason to fear truth. So what we intend to do is to see what Scripture actually says about creation by posing some hard questions that are rarely asked. Some ground rules. We are going to maintain a high view of Scripture. We're going to look at what the text actually says, not what I've been told or I have always thought. Because frankly, my attitudes about this have changed over the last 25 years. It's okay to ask questions of Scripture so as to dig deep. What's not okay is to say, well, that's my view. That's what I think, so that's it. No, that's dogmatism. That's not acceptable. And in everything, we will always try to be respectful of others, since historically, this is a volatile topic with Christians holding a variety of opinions. And speaking of opinions, why are there so many about Genesis chapter 1? It's because one's view of the Genesis creation account depends upon one's view of its literary type. What kind of literature do I think it is? If I think the Genesis creation account is literalistic, meaning that every word means exactly what it says in a plain sense. In other words, there is absolutely no symbolism whatsoever. If I accept that and I say it accords with what actually happens, and the technical word here is concordist, and that means it harmonizes with the reality of the real world. In other words, it's not a story, it's not a summary, it's word for word exactly what happened as it happened. Another possibility is that it is a somewhat concordist drama. I mean, after all, we're talking about only 2 chapters that deal with creation. So obviously, it would seem it has to be a summary. And the way it is worded gives a progressive, dramatic feel to what God is doing. Another possibility is it is a 6-act drama and it's merely a literary piece. It is not intended, nor does it in any way concord with what actually happened. And a fourth view is it's simply a Hebrew myth. And again, it has nothing to do with what actually happened. I think if we can dismiss that last one very easily. As we will see, there are too many things in Genesis 1 and 2 that do, in fact, concord with reality. I think we can dismiss the first one. This literalistic approach does not seem to fit everything we know. For example, the literalistic approach has light created on day 1, but the sun, moon, and stars are not created until day 4. That does not seem to make sense. And therefore, we're going to say that it's not that kind of literature. It's not meant to be a literalistic narrative. 6-act drama, yeah. There are 6 creation days. They follow progressively with things getting more and more complex. That at least has some basis, but non-concordist, I don't think so. There's too much in the text that seems to fit a general scheme of how we know from science that things developed. So, do opinions about the age of the earth really matter? No, unless I'm dogmatic with my opinion. And maybe if my opinion becomes a barrier to the gospel for someone else, if I am so wedded to a particular view that I cannot listen to or bear with another opinion, then I am not being reasonable. I perhaps am not even loving my brother. And there is an opinion that's referred to as the young earth view that is becoming increasingly dogmatic, and I think increasingly a barrier to people who are science educated. And it's an unnecessary barrier, as we will see. So why do some insist that Earth must be young? And by young, they mean less than 10,000 years old. There are 3 presuppositions of the young Earth view. That the Genesis creation was a perfect creation. It had no defects, nothing. Everything was absolutely perfect. Number 2, and it's related to the first, the presupposition that death could not exist before man's sin. They say God could not allow death in his perfect creation before man sinned. And then finally is this view that Genesis 1 is obviously about 1 solar week. It speaks of 6 days of creation and a day of rest. Therefore, it cannot accommodate billions of years that have been developed by science using the Big Bang Theory. So what we're going to do is ask questions and seek answers to test each one of these young Earth premises. The first one is the Genesis creation was a perfect creation. And our question will be, does Genesis 1 support the idea that creation was perfect? Second is death could not exist before man sinned. And here are 4 questions that we will ask about that. And then there are those 4 questions occur before Adam sins. And then there are 3 more questions related to that that occur after Adam sins. And then last of all, we will look at, does Genesis 1 and 2 support only the solar week view? Okay. Does Genesis 1 support that creation was perfect? Well, not really. If you will read chapter 1, and I recommend that you do so, just read it through, you will see that the end of each day has a phrase, and God saw that it, or in the case of the first one, the light was good. The word perfect is never used. And after God created everything, Adam and Eve, it says, and God saw everything that he had made, and behold, it was very good. But again, perfect is never used. Now, the Hebrew word used in Genesis 1 means exactly what you think it means, good. Something is good, it's not bad. It does not mean perfect. There's another Hebrew word, tam, which means mature, complete, without defect. That word was available to Moses, who wrote Genesis. It certainly was available to God, but he didn't tell Moses to use tam, he said use tov. Why do you suppose that was? Well, perhaps one reason is that the perfect creation is future. It's not past. The perfect creation is the new heaven and the new earth. And we are to look forward to God's perfect recreation, not look longingly backward to his very good creation. But also the phrases, and God saw that it was good, and finally that everything was very good. I think it tells us that all creation was very good for God's purposes, what he intended to do with creation. And we can speculate about what some of those purposes might have been. One of them could be that he is going to show all the spiritual beings, those that remained faithful to him and those that rebelled against him, that hybrid beings, meaning us, who are material and spiritual, could freely love him, while some of the spiritual beings had rebelled against him. And obviously, whatever God intended, he was revealing himself more fully to both heavenly and earthly beings. And undoubtedly, much, much more than we can imagine. I am certain that last one is true. Therefore, does Genesis 1 support the idea that creation was perfect? No, it does not. It is proven false by Scripture. You notice we haven't gone to science. We haven't gotten into Big Bang Theory or anything like that yet. We have looked at Scripture only. And the first premise of young Earth theory is shown to be false by Scripture. And in our next session, we will move on to the question, death could not exist before man's sin. Thank you for your time. I look forward to having another session with you.